Conversations across time. Conversations across time.
Hi, I'm Mark Hoffman, former history teacher, now currently a proud member of the Conversations Across Time family. I'd like to introduce to you tonight's show. Tonight's show deals with two primary issues. One, Russia's quest for a warm water port as it explains Vladimir Putin's aggression in the Crimea and Ukraine. Also, we will discuss blunders made by the European powers during and after World War I that possibly led to the current conflicts in the Middle East.
Good evening and welcome to Conversations Across Time. I am so excited about the show we're doing tonight because tonight we are having what we traditionally have here at Conversations Across Time, which is a no-hold-bars conversation between interesting historical personalities. Now, why is this so important? I guess because of what's going on in the Middle East and Russia. We are compelled to do this show. So without very much introduction, I think you'll be able to follow us once we get started. But I do want to say to you that tonight's conversation is about warm water. And when our guests start to speak, you are going to understand exactly what I mean and what we mean when we talk about warm water. So seated to my left is my friend and co-host, Babette Joseph, former Democratic State Representative. Welcome, Babby. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
And seated to my right, to my immediate right, is probably best known as a great writer, but also the father of modern psychology. And it is great pleasure for us to have you here tonight. And this is Fyodor Dostoevsky.
Rabbi Zaitis, glad to be here.
I am so delighted to have you, so I'm looking forward to what you have to say. Seated next to Mr. Dostoevsky is Hussein bin Ali. In trying to give the audience a frame of reference, and when we talk about who Hussein bin Ali is, I say to those of you of a certain generation, if you will remember the film, David Lean's wonderful film, Lawrence of Arabia, Hussein bin Ali is the Omar Sharif character. So hopefully that gives you some perspective as to who he is. And immediately opposite me, which is appropriate for how I think we tend to paint this gentleman, is former Secretary of State, perhaps the grandfather, godfather of all the neocons that exist in this world today, and that is Secretary John Foster Dulles. And I thank you, Secretary Dulles, for deigning to grace us with your presence, because no matter what, I mean, I'm happy that you show up even though we don't agree very often.
Madam.
Welcome. So let's start with putting this in perspective, and I'm going to start with you, Mr. Dostoevsky. If you would be good enough to give the audience some understanding of Vladimir Putin. There is the notion that Vladimir Putin is a madman. That's what's being painted to us as the American public, and I would just like to hear from you as a Russian exactly how you perceive Vladimir Putin.
First of all, let me say that Vladimir, President Putin, thinks I am the greatest author. I'm his favorite author. And to understand Vladimir Putin, you need to understand Russian history. The one thing that us Russians and Mother Russia has always wanted is a warm water port. We were a landlocked country. We could not get out to sea because for 8 months of the year our northern ports were icebound. So our history from Peter the Great, Alexander I, Alexander II, to President Putin has been to secure entrance into the Mediterranean through a warm water port, which would mean going through the Black Sea, past Turkey, through the Straits of the Dardanelles Straits and the Bosphorus Straits to the Mediterranean so we could trade. So Mr. Putin's movement in the Crimean and his movement in the Ukraine is part of Russian history, part of Mother Russia's attempt to secure a warm water port. The Western world, Europe, the United States, Mr. Dulles, the French, The British have always tried to stymie us, and that's what's going on right now.
May I point out, Mr. Dostoevsky, that Mr. Putin is pursuing his nation's imperial interests as he sees fit, just as every other great power does. Just as the British, just as the French, please, madam, just as the British, just as the French, just as the Russians do. And the American government also has the right to pursue similar interests. May I point
Which
that
is
out?
what we did in Cuba,
You-
right?
Mr. Dulles,
Yes.
why would you deny my motherland an access to warm water port? It would be like tying off a human being's aorta artery to strangle their heart.
You are not merely seeking a so-called warm water port. You are seeking imperial power for your nation.
No,
And I can madam, I can understand that, just as every other great nation has the right to do so.
All
In
right,
Cuba
so-
or in any other, or the Philippines or in any other nation.
Why is it that when Mr. Dostoevsky says that, talks about Mother Russia, that you seem to have a certain amount of disdain for Mother Russia, except that your imperialist policies on behalf of the United States led us to the mishigas that we have going on right now in the Middle East.
What, Mishigas, as you point out, I mean, we as a nation have a right to pursue its interests as Russia does, as Britain does, as France does, as Germany does, as every other nation does.
Well, assuming that that's the case, just for this argument, how can we then paint Putin as if he's the worst villain in the world and out of his mind, and we're the sane people and we're always right? That can't be.
Just in the same token, Madam, Mr. McKinley and Mr. Theodore Roosevelt could also be treated as madmen because they sought an
Exactly.
empire for the benefit of the United States.
We finally agree on something.
Yes.
It is obvious that all the so-called revolutionary movements have some communist influence in them. And that was in the background of, it was true in Vietnam, and it was true in
Well,
Cuba.
when you say communist, this is a word that Westerners throw around. It means almost nothing now, because the ideas that you call communism are really just a slightly evolved form of collective economics. It's, what's the phrase you like in your war by another means?
What you call collective economics is called communism, and true prosperity has always come from independent private enterprise,
That's of
private
course not true
entrepreneurs,
at all.
private entrepreneurs
You know-
pursuing through their self-interests,
Don't be
building
alarmed.
businesses.
He only
and by-
sounds like that because he was born rich.
Yes. Mr.
Exactly.
Dulles,
Yes.
Exactly.
right. What is the difference between pan-Slavic Russian movement and
Manifest
Manifest Destiny of the United States?
Because our, as you call imperialism, as you call it, is built on a moral basis that we
We're the
wish.
most
Excuse
immoral
me,
country
please
in the
allow me to
world.
speak.
Mother Russia, the Russian people are way more moral than you are.
How
Manifest
so,
dest-
sir?
In
Man-
every way.
Well,
We're
certainly
much
so.
more
less
religious.
imperialistic than you are.
Yes, can you explain Stalin?
Oh, I wasn't in favor of Stalin. I'm anti-communist.
But
I like the czars way better than Stalin.
Yes, were the Tsars any more moral than Stalin?
No,
May I ask?
the czars were much more moral than President Roosevelt putting Japanese in concentration camps.
Okay,
That
And
was
not
a security
intervening in
measure
Europe
for the
over the
security
Holocaust.
interests of the United States in war,
Wait
sir.
a minute,
Please
wait
understand.
a minute. How do you explain, now that you're talking about the humanity of the United States, because this is very significant at this particular time, how do you explain the president that you served under as Secretary of State and Operation Wetback? And for the audience to understand, Operation Wetback happened in 1953 because after the Second World War, what happened is that the ruling elite in this country realized that they no longer had a need for the surplus Mexican workers that we had in this country. And so therefore, let's let's just deport them. And that is what happened. 88 of them died in the desert. You were Secretary of State under President Eisenhower, who, for all intents and purposes, has been a guest on this show. He's somebody that we are fond of. But we cannot ignore Operation Wetback. You keep talking about the moral imperative that the United States has, and I have a problem with that. Because
Employment
manifest destiny
issues,
in and of
madam, are
itself
not
don't
in
get
my
to kill
venue,
everybody that's in
madam.
the way.
We don't, the State Department does not deal with employment issues.
But you did deal with Operation Wetback. By the way, Manifest Destiny
Yes, please.
is the doctrine that somehow people, white people, Caucasian people in the United States, have a right to the entire continent.
From ocean to ocean.
Yes.
From the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean.
Based
It didn't
on-
There
matter.
has been the belief,
Didn't
there
matter
has
who
been
did
the belief all through our history, there has been the belief ever since the Civil
The
War
belief of
and through
whom?
the Spanish-American War.
Right,
That has
but
been
does
the
that
guiding
make it right?
principle of President Theodore Roosevelt.
Okay. Because I didn't want to get off on this track. I'm sorry, and thank you. I really do need to get back to warm water and let Mr. Dostoevsky express exactly what it is that we're talking about with warm water. You will concede that Russia is landlocked in terms of getting to warm water. The Pacific Ocean, of course, which a lot borders on Russia, that's all frozen and it's not a trade route. So that the need, as Mr. Dostoevsky just explained, for Russia, Mother Russia, to have access to a warm water port is because they need to get access to the Atlantic trade routes.
To
Will you
do
concede
so,
that?
madam, they would have to interfere in the internal affairs of foreign countries, such as in the Ukraine. And I don't see how that makes them any more moral. They're acting in their imperial interests just as every other nation does. That does not make them any more moral, madam.
My question to you is that the notion that when the Soviet Union existed, okay, Ukraine was a part of the Soviet Union. Therefore, access to warm water through Ukraine was always available. I mean, there was a port at Odessa. You'll concede that.
Yes.
Okay, so that once the Soviet Union broke up, then there was no longer access to warm water for Russia. I just don't understand how the geniuses who decided that when the Cold War ended to not sit down and negotiate how Russia would have access to warm water. Why are they surprised by what's going on there?
Because Odessa is in Ukraine.
But Ukraine
Ever
is part of
since
the Soviet
the end of the Soviet Union, the Ukraine has been a sovereign nation, and Odessa has been part of Ukraine. Therefore, Russia should have consulted with Ukraine, one sovereign nation to another, to ask permission to use Odessa as their so-called precious warm water port they believe they need so dearly.
Mr. Dulles, Secretary Dulles,
Yes, Mr. Dostoevsky?
why are you, as Secretary of State, President Eisenhower, your predecessors, so ignorant of Mother Russia's history? Since Peter the Great, we have been striving for warm water ports. We haven't always succeeded. First France and England tried to stymie us, and then, of course, you and your bully tactics always tried to stymie us. Why do you care if we have a warm water port? And don't talk about the native people of the Ukraine or the Crimean, because the United States has no moral standing. You had no compunctions about taking the Native American land for your own self-interest.
Neither does your nation under the Soviet Union have any compunction of invading
We're
Afghanistan
not under the Soviet Union.
or
That's
Czechoslovakia
what I
or
just said.
Hungary.
I just said you're ignorant of history.
And you're a genius of history, sir?
Yes.
How so?
Besides my great writing, I studied history, and I know Mother Russia, what our policies were since Peter the Great, Alexander the First, Alexander the Second, and if you dummies in the West didn't understand what we were about and what we were entitled to, shame on you.
And why is your imperialism superior to our imperialism, sir?
It's not. It's equal.
It's certainly more novel than your imperialism.
How so,
now,
sir?
The thing that is most striking about your comment about imperialism, about rights, is this attitude, I suppose it came from the British, but it's impossible to know for sure.
The British had their imperialism, we have ours.
You'll get to finish. No one can stop you forever. What happens is these people, they say that they see something, they want it.
Mm-hmm.
What happens next? It's just a dance. It's a dance with words. They find ways to say words, and they say more words, and they keep taking. And that's all you've been doing. You have no right. No one has a right to something in someone else's hand. I come to your home and I say, oh, that is very nice, give me that. That doesn't make it mine.
Just as Mr. Dostoevsky has to understand that Russia can't have Odessa or any other so-called warm weather part just because it wants it.
Why? No.
Excuse me, but how is it that Mr. Putin's imperialism is tolerable, but the Americans acting in their self-interest is not tolerable? Please answer me that.
Mr. Dulles,
Yes.
again, I don't want to insult you and tell you you're ignorant of history.
You
but
just
you
did,
are.
sir.
Anyway, we had the Ukraine. We
But you
had
don't have it
the
anymore,
Crimea.
sir.
Premier Khrushchev, who was a Ukrainian himself, gave it up. We had it. We didn't have to give it up. So we're just exploiting what we did before, and we had a warm water port, and everything was fine. We didn't have any problem with the United States. In fact, there was a détente between my country, Mother Russia, and you guys. When you were there, of course, you wanted to go on brinkmanship and stir up, and you probably wanted the nuclear war more than anybody. But the fact is, we had it.
You don't have it anymore, so
just-
please negotiate with the Ukrainians.
They have it now.
That's the point. When you say they don't have it anymore, and you're right, Babette, they have it now. I guess what I would like our audience to understand is the decision that was made that Russia should not have access to warm water. And
Right.
wait a minute.
Thank you.
How do you get to do that? What's your right?
Well,
There is no right.
there's also decisions made about this character that we haven't said very much about.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Hussein bin Ali, who the United States and Britain and France said, if you help us by attacking the Ottoman Empire, because they were allies of Germany, then you'll distract the Germans and we will give you an empire, which they talked about being the top of the Mediterranean all the way through Turkey and some parts of Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. And what did you get out of that when the war was over? Zero, nothing.
Promises.
They lied.
The promises weren't worth the paper they were written on.
As we say in Russia, Zabata Yublaka, it means Western bastards. That's what they were. Western
You
bastards.
can't leave
wait
a nation, excuse me, you can't leave a nation, a vast nation such as this, to a people who are not as advanced as we are.
well,
It
say-
is-
I
Oh,
think-
I'm telling the truth,
What does
madam.
that mean?
I think the point
Just
that
as I said, madam.
the point that we're trying to make, I think, here is that there are reasons for the way Russia behaves now that are political and from their point of view are 100% right, because they need access all year round to trade routes.
Just as the same,
And we promised everybody everything, and then we didn't do it, and now we wonder why they were angry
Secretary Dulles.
And
you-
Yes.
I'm sorry.
and
Go ahead.
armed.
Secretary Dulles, you remind me in many ways of a character that I wrote about, Raskolnikov, in Crime and Punishment.
Rascal?
Yes, Raskolnikov, you think that
Seems
by
fair.
doing certain things that it's right, and that even though they're evil, the long-range good makes it okay, and you're dead wrong.
Not necessarily, sir. What I am doing, all of my work has been towards the security interests of and commercial interests of the United
And the
States,
commercial
But
which
interests
has
of you. The
led to the
commercial interests of you.
which has led to the
No, no,
prosperity,
excuse me, it does not
led to the
work here, sir.
prosperity of the United
It
States.
does not work here.
If you You probably haven't read any of my novels, have you?
I have no time, sir.
Well, you have no intellect. But anyway,
Excuse me.
but anyway, the bottom line is the ends do not justify the means.
They do in statescraft, sir.
No, they don't.
And the bottom line is, when you think that way, all kinds of bad consequences, as we're seeing now in the Middle East and in Afghanistan and Syria, every place, really, that's the consequences of the double dealing that we did along with the Western powers
Now-
after the Second World
May I
War.
just ask, because we have a map, we do have a map that shows Syria today. Because I want you to look at that. You see over on the left of the map, it says Tartus, which it actually is on, Tartus is on the Mediterranean Sea. Are you aware, and I know you are, sir, that
Yes.
Russia, since 1971, has paid the government of Syria for access to warm water to the Mediterranean through Tartus. Now, the reason that becomes particularly interesting today is because this started in 1971. When it was the Soviet Union, they were dredging the port at Tartus because Russia needed access to warm water. They were dredging the port at Tartus, and they have paid a stipend to Syria. So when
Billions and billions of dollars.
billions of dollars, they forgave Syria's debt, I think, for $9 billion. And they have paid to this country money for access to a warm water port. So when we hear all of this happening in Syria today, in 2015, we are hearing about what's going on in
Well,
Syria.
the
and
governor, the government that we paid it to is directly related to Assad.
Yes.
So it's in Russia's interest. They don't want another government there that they'll have to pay another $9 billion to or forgive debts.
So can
So
you-
that's their interest, their commercial
yes, they are
and
acting in
security
their
interest.
imperial interest, just as we are in maintaining the Panama Canal. The Panama Canal has been in our interest, just as the Port of Tarsus has been in Russia's interest. It's no different and no better. Therefore, why is it
Thank
that
you. Thank
why
you.
is
We all
interest
agree.
why is
No,
Russia's
stop,
interest
stop.
in
We all
Tartus?
agree
No,
with
please.
you. We
Why
all
is
agree
Tartus?
with you.
Why is Tartus's interest in?
Yeah.
Why is the
This is
Russian
why
interest
we
in
are
Tartus
glad you are no longer
good
involved.
and the American
Because you
interest
think
in the
if you
Panama
talk
Canal
loud,
bad?
you
Please
think if
answer
you
that.
talk- if you
We-
think if
we
you talk
agree
loud,
with
you're
you.
gonna be right. We agree with you. We agree with you. That's exactly the point. Why is it that when Russia advanced its commercial interests, there's something wrong with that? But
Right,
when
and
the
they're
United
villains,
States-
or they're crazy.
Exactly. But when the United States does that,
Then that's good.
We have to advance our interests just as Russia advances interests.
So then why
There's
are
no
we-
sense in charity, madam.
Why are we painting Putin as half crazy and the things that he's doing as completely apolitical, that has nothing to do with us, and it has everything to do
Have
with
you
us?
seen him, madam, posing half naked in the Siberia? I mean, the man is obviously not stable.
Well, who's a world power?
Well, I think
the person-
Siberia could rattle anyone.
Who's really? Who's
Well, I
really
spent some
stable?
time in Siberia in the Gulag when I was sentenced to death, so I
Yeah.
kind of know a little bit about it. And
Sentenced to death.
yeah, I was sentenced to death by the Tsar, and they commuted the sentence.
Well,
I
they
was
did a
very,
terrible job of executing you.
but
Couldn't
anyway,
find the drugs.
let me ask you this, Mr. Secretary.
Yes.
In the geopolitical world, and you talked about Putin being crazy, and since many of my novels dealt with the psychology of the characters and their motivations, I might say that all the world leaders are crazy.
Yes,
What would
so.
you say to that?
yes.
That, I suppose
Yeah.
we're all fiddling while Rome burned.
Exactly.
Yes.
They are more than likely, they're acting in what they consider their nation's self-interest. I can appreciate that.
Well, that might be a little crazy,
How so, sir?
because it may lead to the destruction of mankind, which you were willing to do with your brinkmanship.
What brinkmanship?
That was your policy, wasn't it, to bring the world to the brink of nuclear war if we couldn't get what we wanted?
Couldn't you understand that we were fighting communism, a system which you would have been appalled by.
I
A
re-
totally godless system.
I
he
wasn't,
was a
I
poet.
wasn't alive then, but I do recall that saying, better dead than red.
Then you appreciate what we're
No, I
doing,
don't
sir.
appreciate it. It's stupid and it's crazy, and you're talking about people crazy. You're crazy.
I would concede that Putin is a little strange. I mean, lots of people, as we were saying,
He
who
can't be strange if I'm his favorite author.
That's true. He's strange in other areas. It's true. I think
Aren't we
of him
all?
very often as President Nipples because he's always half naked and on a horse or something. That's a little weird. But politically speaking,
He's on a horse.
yeah, I've seen him do that. I've seen pictures. But his political motivation is quite understandable when we look at what the United States and the Western powers did in Russia and the Soviet Union in those days and the Middle East after the Second World War. It makes
What was
perfect
the
sense.
terrible thing that the Western powers, including the United States, did? They were trying to repress contain the communism. That's all they were trying to do, Madam.
Because we beat up on you about this, let me ask this question.
Yes,
Because you were present at the signing of the Treaty of Versailles.
yes.
And for those in the audience who have watched this show with any regularity, you do know that we have discussed the fact that it was amazing that with the writing of the Treaty of Versailles, that anyone did not anticipate the Second World War. So I'd like to ask this. What do you make of the fact that Hussein bin Ali was recruited by the British? Because remember, under the Ottoman Empire,
Who are the Turks, right?
who were the Turks,
Basically.
that there had always been a caliph. There had always been that since the 7th century. I mean, this gentleman represents a direct descendant of the founder of Islam in the 7th century. There has always been a caliph, and there has always been a caliphate, meaning the state of the caliph. And Mr. bin Ali was a leader who was approached by Great Britain and the United States to fight against the Ottoman Empire, the Turks, because the Ottoman Empire was leaning towards Germany. So in the First World War, to assure victory, what the United States, what Britain, and what France wanted was they wanted an Arab revolt to distract the Germans and ensure that they were able to win the First World War. You were at the Treaty of Versailles.
So we recruited this gentleman and promised him stuff.
I am not familiar with your religion, sir. I am not
We're
familiar
not talking
with
about
that
religion.
region.
We're not talking about. We're talking about
Politics.
politics. We're not talking about religion. We're saying that there was an agreement.
They promised.
They made a promise to sustain the caliphate if
I'm not
they would
familiar
fight, if
with
they
a
would
caliphate,
organize
madam.
and fight the Germans, fight the Ottoman Empire, and thereby fight the Germans.
You see how it works, madam. The Ottoman Empire was taken out of the war, and Germany eventually lost the war. And you see how it worked beautifully.
Oh, I see how it worked. Yes, I see how it worked. I see how they got
But
screwed.
he got nothing.
He got nothing.
A rather backward people, madam, not capable
he
of
didn't
building a
deserve
modern
anything.
state
Well,
he
comparable
deserved to
to
be
France,
lied to,
Britain,
right?
or the United States.
It is extremely fascinating that he would say that my people are incapable of building a modern state when the advent of oil wealth has catapulted the entire Middle East into either explosive disarray or obscene wealth.
So this has been a very exciting discussion, and as you can see, our guests tonight are really very much involved in this heated discussion. And we've asked you to join in next week, tune in next week, because we are going to indeed again have
Cross time.
Mr. Dostoevsky, Sharif Ben Ali, and Secretary John Foster Dulles. And so, Babby, we will pick this up again next week because this has been an exciting discussion and we can't end it here. But please stay tuned and join us next week. This has been Conversations Across Time, and good night.
Conversations across time. Conversations across time.